Hey friends, Zach here. With all the talk about whether U.S. soldiers should follow unconstitutional orders, you might not think that Quakers have much to add to the conversation. After all, Friends traditionally avoid the military altogether. But this episode from Season 1 with Zachary Moon proves otherwise. Zachary was a Quaker who felt called to enlist as a Navy chaplain, and he had to figure out how to be a person of peace inside of a machine of war. It's a fascinating look at the cost of integrity, and honestly, it feels more relevant now than when we first aired it in 2023.
For his entire life, Zachary Moon has been deeply embedded in Quakerism. He was a peacenik. He protested outside of prisons and a president's house. He had a season of wearing plain dress, beard, suspenders, the whole thing. And he was the token young Quaker at his yearly meeting. And then Zachary felt called to join the military as a chaplain, which turned out to be its own kind of battle.
Gosh, I remember there was like a handful of people who thought that I was going to like Harriet Tubman folks like out of the military. Like I was going to be like a secret agent who was going to like underground railroad folks like to be conscientious objectors.
For others, there was no possible scenario where it was okay for a Quaker to join the military. One of those people was Zachary's mom.
And that relationship was much more high stakes. I owe her everything. I am everything because of who she is. And she experienced it as a betrayal, as the most shameful possible thing I could do in my life.
Today, what happens when your calling is at odds with the identity that your community holds most dear?
The Quaker
Podcast. Story, spirit, sound.
All right, you're first.
I'm John Watts.
I'm Georgia Sparling, and today's topic is a pretty timely one because it's the day after Independence Day here in the U.S. It's a day that's full of patriotism, and when there's lots of talk about the military and fighting and winning wars and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and Quakers are, of course, notorious peaceniks, so, it's not exactly our favorite holiday.
Yeah, that tracks. But today we're going to talk about a Quaker guy who joined the military, but as a chaplain.
As a chaplain, right? So there's only one person I can think of who you might be talking about. That's Zachary Moon, right?
Yeah, that's him. And even though he didn't join the military to become a soldier, his decision caused him a lot of inner turmoil, and it confused the people in his community, like especially his mom.
Okay. Yeah, I can imagine. So I actually interviewed Zachary about this story before. It was when I was releasing weekly Quaker YouTube videos, and I interviewed him and posted it in a video and called it "How Can Pacifists Support Our Troops?" and we got a lot of comments on that video.
Yeah, like what kind of comments?
Well, this is an issue that Quakers feel really passionately about from different angles. So I'll just give you one example. A commenter said, "It is not possible to uphold our peace testimony and wear a uniform." And then that same person went on to say, to ask what meeting Zachary is part of and to call him he called him a disgrace to the Religious Society of Friends.
Wow, like that's pretty intense.
It's intense. Yeah. Quakers care a lot about peace, but, that gets expressed in a lot of different ways.
Right. Yeah. And we talked about this a little bit in episode 2, where we talked about George Fox. And, he really was the first person to push back against participating in violence or war.
Sure, yeah, it goes all the way to our beginning. I mean, growing up Quaker, this was something that was ingrained in me from the time I was a little kid. War and really violence of any kind, like in speech or in physical action. It's something that most Quakers I know work really hard to avoid.
But being a chaplain, that's a lot different than becoming a soldier.
I mean, yeah, some would make that argument. And there are a lot of stories throughout history of Quakers being conscripted into the military, but then avoiding direct participation on the front lines by, driving ambulances or doing desk jobs or something like that. But other Quakers have argued that any participation is wrong because the military is an organization whose entire purpose is violence. So those are the Quakers who, like many before them, would choose to go to prison before they would have anything to do with supporting a war.
It's definitely got a lot of layers and nuance, more than I think I would have realized.
For sure.
Yeah, and I think that plays out in today's episode. So how about we go ahead and jump in?
Let's do it.
The fact that Zachary Moon joined the Navy, even as a chaplain, will make sense, I think, once we get into the story. But right up to the point where he felt that call, it was not something that he would ever have considered. Zachary grew up in the Berkeley Meeting.
So these were folks who had not been brought up in the tradition, but particularly kind of who Berkeley, California is in the 60s, 70s, and beyond. It was a place that was just thickly resonant with particularly the value of peace and the value of peace and anti-war kind of commitment.
I want to emphasize that Zachary didn't just grow up in the Berkeley Meeting. It was woven into the fabric of his daily life.
For much of my childhood, my family served as the caretaker of our local meeting. So going to meeting for worship wasn't like a one-day-a-week thing. So like the extended family that was wrapped around me, raising me as a child, were members of our Quaker Meeting.
When his parents split up, the meeting told his mother, Laura Magnani, that they could do whatever they wanted, but the meeting got to keep Zachary. And he fit in well with this peace-loving community. His mother was heavily involved in prison reform. He attended peace rallies and protested executions. Yet he also remembers having this niggling discomfort with what he saw as an avoidance of God talk in his meeting.
Peace was something that we were all agreeing with. So some folks would say, Jesus was the Prince of Peace, right? So they'd bring some of that kind of Christianness to it. But other folks would say, no, don't bring Jesus around here. And usually that was a kind of reaction, I think, that had to do in large part for many people's upbringing. That Jesus had not been a benevolent, warm, compassionate, fighter for justice. Jesus had been a bludgeon. Jesus had been a punisher, a source of shame and guilt and control. So let's not talk about Jesus too much.
Zachary describes his early view of Quakerism as this isolated island in the middle of a whole lot of chaos. Yet, as he got older, he says he and other young Quakers began to see that differently. Zachary realized he wasn't on a tiny island. He was part of something much more magnificent, something that was alive.
It was actually the back of this extraordinary whale that had just been like waiting for us in the middle of the ocean and was like, let's move. Like, what's under you is not a piece of rock. It's like this magnificent living creature that wants to dive, it wants to move, it wants to migrate, it wants to change.
He kept seeing this image even as he got pushback in his community about going outside of tradition.
But I don't see that as a Quaker problem. Like, I see that truly as being a problem with every faith community I've ever come across is, are we going to keep this thing quiet? Are we going to keep this thing under lock and key?
Zachary did what so many West Coast kids do. He went east for university, to Vassar College.
In a little collapsed industrial town called Poughkeepsie.
And you may be thinking, this is where he diverges from Quakerism. This is where he experiments with other religious traditions and faiths. Nope.
While I was at college, my faith, my sense of spiritual connection really went from being this kind of total immersive thing, like in terms of my environment, to being something that was like finding new depths to my soul and my sense of connection as well. And so I started doing some kind of like wild things. Like I started wearing a Quaker plain dress every day my senior year of college, which at Vassar, which is a very secular environment, I think like freaked out everybody. They were like, Zachary, you wore that same thing yesterday. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to wear this every day. I mean, I got the mail order catalog, from the plain dressing Amish folk. And then I stopped shaving and I let my beard just get shaggy.
His senior year, as his courses wound down, Zachary traveled the country by bus and train to visit family and also to attend meetings for Friends General Conference. His plain dress drew a lot of attention on those trips and opened up surprising spiritual conversations.
And at first, you feel a little embarrassed, but then you're like, oh my goodness, this is like, would never happen if I was just wearing, my hoodie and jeans. Like people wouldn't come up to me and start talking about God. And I really cherish the gift of that, to just talk with other people about what was God in their life.
This was the early aughts, post 9/11, and religion was sometimes a fraught topic. Yet here he was having frank conversations about God wherever he went.
But ultimately, I laid down that practice because I didn't want it to become static. I didn't want it to become the guy who wears suspenders. I needed to try to honor the whale, that was swimming and wanted to move and wanted to change. And I think actually in retrospect, that was actually kind of like the first masterclass in chaplaincy.
As a college graduate, Zachary worked with a couple of nonprofits back out west. One of those was a pacifist organization in the Nevada desert that challenged the use of nuclear weapons. Yet, even in this good work, he felt restless.
When I would be quiet, going to Quaker Meeting, praying at home, whenever I would be in any kind of contemplative open space, what kept coming up was working with people who were in the military, doing ministry with people who were in the military. Now, talk about absurd, talk about where does that fit? That was the weirdest possible message for a Quaker kid from Berkeley, California.
He didn't talk about it yet. Instead, he started going to seminary, which was also a little weird for a liberal Quaker kid. And he also did field work at a veterans hospital.
That was also viewed with suspicion. They were sick. They were broken. They were traumatized by their war experience. And so caring for them was still tolerable.
Again, this felt like good work, but he knew he was still being asked to do more. But anytime Zachary tried to broach the topic of working with the military, he was met with opposition.
And what I kept hearing back from community was, really what amounted to, Quaker God doesn't want you to do this. But then immediately the question came to mind, well, what does God want me to do? And then the feedback to that was, we don't know about God. We know about Quaker God, and Quaker God doesn't want you to do this. And that's all I got, right? And different versions of that feedback. The kind of scope and theology of our understanding of God was very much restrained within particular markers within our tradition. And the biggest piece of that was we're all here for peace, and there won't be involvement and engagement directly with people who are in the military. That didn't put any of this to rest, right? Because I didn't feel like this was Quakerism telling me to do this. It felt like there was something bigger in our universe that had a hold of me and was working me pretty hard. In August of 2011, I raised my hand and I commissioned as a chaplain in the United States Navy.
Yes, Dad and I, when he was teeny tiny, we used to say, well, I wonder what he'll do to rebel, when we thought about green hair and tattoos and things like that. But we didn't think about this. And, of course, he wasn't rebelling. But the idea that he would join the Navy just never crossed my mind, especially because he is such a pacifist. He still is a pacifist.
That's Laura Magnani, Zachary's mom. She and Zachary both say they've always had a close relationship, which is why it was particularly difficult for both of them when he joined the military.
I think he postponed telling me that as long as he possibly could, which was probably smart because it was a very big blow.
Laura remembers being at her son's wedding and trying to convince a chaplain friend of his to talk Zachary out of going into the Navy.
And it was counter to everything that we believed and everything that we had worked on.
Laura had come to Quakerism in college, and one of the first things she did was join a year-long course on nonviolence. Laura has spent most of her adult life working for Quaker organizations, starting with the Friends Committee on Legislation of California, and then 32 years with the American Friends Service Committee.
In my work with the AFSC, I worked on the criminal legal system. I was a prison abolitionist, and I worked on prison issues. So I had quite an intimate relationship with prison chaplains.
She still couldn't reconcile the idea of her son becoming a Navy chaplain.
So I definitely had a real learning curve. And I feel like I wasn't there for him in the beginning. I really feel like he was going through this very traumatic experience of trying to hear this call and all of the negative voices that would come with it. And I wasn't helping him with that because I was dealing with my own trauma around it in the beginning. What I learned once he was in it, and I was still hoping he would change his mind even when he was in boot camp.
But that isn't what happened. Zachary was getting all kinds of responses from family and from friends in his meeting.
Like some folks were like, wow, that is weird, but I like weird things, so maybe this is okay. And then there were, I remember there was like a handful of people that I crossed paths with who thought that I was going to like Harriet Tubman folks like out of the military. Like I was going to be like a secret agent who was going to like Underground Railroad folks like to be conscientious objectors. Like that was like my sneaky plan that I couldn't say out loud, but they were like wink wink. Yeah, I was like a secret double agent who was going to be like the pacifist who save people from themselves. And I was like, oh gosh, that's such a particular way of looking at this. It is not what this is.
And although he'd felt a strong call to military chaplaincy, Zachary wasn't prepared to act on that call by himself.
But where we were collectively in that moment was that there wasn't a kind of sense of general readiness to discern that call. I knew I couldn't trust this if I didn't really have that space to test it in discernment. I needed clearness, like in the most profound kind of way. I needed discernment, and I couldn't do it by myself. I had done everything I could possibly do, and it was a mess. It didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense to anybody else. I had broken my mother's heart. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with any of this.
So Zachary reached out to other Quaker meetings.
And then another very unexpected, wonderful thing happened, which was I knew some folks who were a part of a pastoral Quaker community, a programmed Quaker community in Metro Portland, Camas, Washington. They said, there are a couple of kids who grew up in this meeting who are serving in the military right now. They deserve a good chaplain. So we'll sit with you and we'll test this with you. And those folks didn't know me from anybody. They just received this letter from a perfect stranger that said, I'm out here in the wilderness and I need some warmth. They said, come on around here and let's see what God is doing. And that's what we did.
After the break, Zachary goes to boot camp.
John, can you hear me now?
Hey, Don. Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry about
Perfect.
that. So a week ago, you left this really sweet comment on our Facebook page talking about how my work had helped you in your spiritual journey. And I wonder if you could tell me a bit about it.
Absolutely. I was watching this series and they enlist this Quaker family. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder what Quakers are about. That led me down a 3-day rabbit hole of trying to figure out why I couldn't be a Quaker. I was Googling at one point. I was like, what have Quakers done that's bad? And it was always coming up with articles from Quakers being self-critical, like, oh, we could have done more to abolish slavery. Oh, we could have done more to be against the Vietnam War. I mean, it was always these self-critical articles. I was so frustrated because I was like, what's wrong with these damn Quakers? Eventually, it led me to the Quaker Speak videos. I mean, I was fully in it. Like lunch break at work, I was watching Quaker Speak videos. I'd go home and watch Quaker Speak videos. It just felt so authentic.
Awesome. So tell me about your first time going to meeting.
Oh, absolutely. So it was Dayton Friends Meeting, and there were 2 messages given that day at meeting. And the first one talked about reading the Bible, and the other one I will remember till the day I die was from Alan McGrew, and he is a professor of geology from University of Dayton. And he was talking about how trees and nature work together as a community. And so for my first meeting, I was sold hook, line, and sinker. I was like, you couldn't pull me away from Quakers if you tried. I mean, to hear a message of faith, immediately followed by a more empirical argument, which also underlines the presence of spirit in our life, I just couldn't have been happier.
If you'd like to support our work, please visit thequaker.org. We need your help to continue telling these stories of spiritual courage. Together, we can build a meaningful voice for friends on 21st century platforms, just like this one. Again, that website is thequaker.org. Thanks so much.
Welcome back. So I'm going to bring John back on for a little mid-episode debrief. So, John, I know you are already familiar with Zachary's story, but as you listen to him talk about the turmoil that he felt and also like the response he was receiving from his meeting, like how does all of that sit with you?
Oh, I mean, it's such a rich conversation, right? And it strikes at the heart of our commitment as friends. And it brings up a lot of questions. You know, does a commitment to nonviolence mean that we don't participate at all in anything related to armed conflict? Like, I'm curious about Zach, how he thinks about the work that he's doing. Like, is he interrupting the cycle of violence by doing this work, or is there some way that he's contributing to it? You know, or is there a deeper level of questioning than that?
And yeah, like Zachary never stopped being a pacifist. Like both he and his mom were quick to point that out.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more. You know, I'm particularly struck by Zachary's reflections on what he's planning to do while he's in the military. Like, does he see himself spiritually nurturing soldiers and then just sending them back out on the battlefield? Or does he have a different agenda? You know, at the same time, it's sort of like, who am I to judge? I mean, I know that the Spirit works in mysterious ways. And as Quakers, we believe in continuing revelation. And our commitment to things like nonviolence are, I don't know, they're not set in stone. Quakers don't have hard and fast rules about these things, but we do commit to deep listening and to exploring these principles, and that's why we call them testimonies.
Yeah, and I think as Zachary talks about, you know, deep listening was a really important part of his coming to this decision.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that there is a lot of room for different interpretations of how the peace testimony is kind of manifested in each person's life.
Right.
But yeah, so I think we will get into more of these complexities as we continue the second half of the episode.
Great. I look forward to it. Let's see what he says.
Zachary's family, his religious community, they're flummoxed and even in direct opposition to his joining the military as a chaplain. And he is about to enter a world that is so foreign from everything he's ever done.
I mean, there were so many things that will always be like remarkably strange about that experience, because I was still this Quaker kid from Berkeley, California. You know, that I couldn't get that out of my system, right? And I was plunged into this world that had dramatically different values and beliefs and practices and behaviors, ways of relating, ways of organizing, ways of doing things. And it was hostile. I mean, it was just the most uncomfortable, terrifying thing that I had been plunged into, and it was exactly what I was supposed to be doing.
But first, Zachary was off to boot camp. After 5 weeks of military life, he took a brief trip home to visit his family. On the plane ride, he immediately realized how much the military had already changed him.
There is hostility that is baked into the machinery of the military-industrial complex. I mean, this institution exists to subjugate and control and destroy folks. I mean, that's what the whole thing is about.
Zachary is sitting in an aisle seat on a commercial airplane, and he finds himself getting irrationally agitated just by the inefficiency of boarding an airplane. You may be thinking, yes, we've all been there, but then he sees another passenger walking down the aisle.
His shirt was untucked, his hygiene was all messed up, and he was walking slow, and like he was, and it was like he was the antithesis visually of what we had been working on, putting into order for the last 5 weeks in boot camp. And I was filled out to the brim with disgust and revolt.
Throughout boot camp, Zachary had to shave twice a day to keep up with the Navy's regulations for facial hair.
And that practice, right, the intensity of that and all of these other bits and pieces had gotten now in me. They were a part of my wiring, a part of my embodiment, the way that I was living in the world, the way I was flying on this flight.
And he's sitting there thinking, I'm a non-combatant. I don't know this guy. He isn't my enemy.
And yet there's something in me that now knows that this person is other, this person is divergent, and therefore is problematic. It took my breath away to just realize, wow, as old as my brain is, as formed as my brain is, it could, 5 weeks of living and breathing and doing everything else in that environment can still take a hold of you in some of those kind of powerful ways.
Recognizing the way that the military had already changed him was pretty startling. But despite what his mother had hoped, Zachary still knew he was in the right place. He emphasizes that there are some misconceptions about the people who serve in the military.
There are people of every shape and size, every belief system, every ideology are serving in the military, because people are not serving in the military in large part because of ideological reasons or political commitments, or I like this president, so now I'm going to join the military. The thing that really holds most of those people in common is that they are looking for ways to purposefully serve their community and their world. And those military recruiters showed up at their high school and told them this was the way they would get to go to college and that they would get to purposely serve their country. I mean, really big ideas are very compelling to 18-year-olds. And until we fix some of the stuff in our country that essentially doesn't allow people to get access to college without having certain kinds of class privilege, this will continue to be exactly how this works.
Zachary says that what many people don't realize is that with the draft, there was more room for soldiers to criticize the military complex. Like, they had not voluntarily joined the military. But today,
everybody there psychologically thinks that they have volunteered and therefore they have asked for this. Because the ways in which I hear folks, peace-loving folks, pacifist folks talk about the draft is though somehow what we've got right now is better, and it's not better. And in fact, some of the consequence of it has actually been deeply problematic. What we have right now needs good chaplains even more, because it needs chaplains who can, often in small ways, create space for people to ventilate the horrific things that have happened to them and that they're involved in.
During his 5 years as a chaplain, Zachary said that he found the biggest need among soldiers was to have a place where they could speak truthfully about their experiences.
And sort of incredibly, I felt like I was being a really good Quaker. I was like putting my Quaker stuff to work all the time. Not in that I was a pacifist on the sidelines, shaking my fist and holding my handmade sign saying war is wrong. But I was showing up, present, available, listening, right? Being willing to understand the way that God moves in people's lives in unexpected ways, right? That God is truly present in our midst in ways that if we don't quiet our own minds, we might not even perceive all of the different ways that God is up in this space, working in people's lives. Like, that was a big part of my chaplaincy work, was just creating open spaces for people to show up and be human beings.
As Zachary's mom says, this is the way her son has been since he was young, stepping across the aisle, being a hands-on peacemaker. She recalls a time when he participated in an anti-war protest near President George Bush's home in Texas. There were a bunch of counter-demonstrators.
And all the peaceniks were, kind of huddled in their safe space and basically turning their backs on these other people. And Zach walked across the street and started talking to them. Wanted to know where they were coming from. Wanted to know, and I mean, what's the point of being a peacenik if you can't, reach out to people who disagree? Over and over again, I had seen him show up that way, as a real peacemaker and as somebody who didn't just talk to the people who agreed with him. And I could see from his witness that, Quakers didn't take it far enough for him. Didn't really do the hard work in some ways. I mean, either we rested on our laurels a lot, and I still think that, or we didn't, we went where we got comfortable and we stayed there instead of really trying to open ourselves. So I think in that respect, that's what I really learned from him, was that peacemaking has to go on all the time.
Zachary and Laura continue to have a strong, loving relationship. I didn't want to leave that part hanging. It's been about 12 years since he enlisted, and looking back, Zachary admits that when he got this calling, he had a hard time expressing himself in the midst of such a big, messy, chaotic decision. He says that when they returned to this topic,
I've been able to be more clear and articulate for myself. What was God doing right here? I can be better at talking about that with her. I can be better at holding those questions with her. And with time, she can think about it. She can see me doing it. She can face those fears and ask those hard questions and really do the faithful work to try to understand something that's very hard to understand. And she's been willing to do that because she's a deeply loving person, and she feels that kind of way about me, right? So to me, I understand both her reaction and ultimately her co-journeying with me in this process to be a deep expression of her own faithfulness and her own courage.
Today, Zachary is a professor of theology and psychology at Chicago Theological Seminary. He's part of a multiracial Protestant congregation. He says he sings hymns, listens to a sermon each week, takes communion, but he still has deep ties to Quakerism.
There are still Quakers all over my life, and friends and family and people who are very dear to me, colleagues, and Quakerism is still my DNA. So discernment is still of the utmost importance to me, and our beliefs and our traditions and our history are still very much like in my bloodstream that way.
I want to leave you with one last thing that Zachary said to me during our interview as kind of some food for thought.
I think sometimes in different kinds of human communities, we think we have to find stuff that we all agree on. And that's the sturdy stuff, you know? And Quakers have our own version of this, right? We code it with consensus. You know, well, there was consensus here, so that must be sturdy. And sometimes, unfortunately, that kind of becomes a least common denominator kind of belonging, right? Like, well, we couldn't agree on the big thing, but we could agree on the small thing, so we've got the small thing. And I find myself less and less persuaded that that's the strongest thing that human community can do. That actually finding ways to love in the midst of misunderstanding, of confusion, of chaos, of trouble, of difference, and all that difference can generate in our community, finding ways to hold on to each other and love each other and belong to each other in those moments is a much more powerful kind of way to be together. So rather than telling this as a story of how Zachary and Quakers broke up, you know, to me this is more of a question of like, wow, how in the midst of trying to understand this really hard thing, a whole bunch of folks who were trying to figure out how to be faithful came apart at the seams. And that wasn't the end of the story. Not for me and not for them. That story is still being written today, and will keep being written.
Thanks so much for listening, and thank you to Zachary and Laura for coming on this episode. So, what stands out to you about Zachary Moon's story? Head over to our website to share your thoughts. That's at quakerpodcast.com. And while you're there, you can also download a transcript from this episode along with some discussion questions, and you can subscribe to the show. This episode was produced by me, Georgia Sparling, and also John Watts. John also wrote the music for this episode. The Quaker Podcast is part of the Quaker Project, a brand new Quaker media organization with a focus on lifting up voices of spiritual courage and giving Quakers a platform in 21st century media. If you want to support our work, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. We're a brand new project, and every contribution expands our capacity to tell Quaker stories in a fresh way. Thank you so much for listening. We make this show for you. And now that you've heard from us, here's a little bit from one of our listeners. We recently asked for people to call in and tell us what the phrase conscientious objector means to them. Here's one of the responses that we received.
This is Bernie Davis at Raleigh Friends Meeting in North Carolina. I initially came to recognize myself as a CO as a college student during the Vietnam War. Having not been raised a Quaker, that was not an easy or automatic decision for me. I like to say I did not become a CO because I was a Quaker. I came to realize I was a Quaker because I was a CO. What being a CO meant to me at that time was that I could not directly participate in combat, take the life of another human being because I was ordered to do so by someone else. Thinking through my options and choosing to apply for CO status on that basis seemed like a significant step at the time. In fact, it was the easy part. I've come to see refusing military service as only the tip of the iceberg of the true meaning of being a CO. Just as serving in a non-combat role in the military leaves one participating in war, there are countless ways our lives are connected to the causes of war, even though others are the direct combatants. Trying to live true to the broad implications of my CO beliefs has been a lifelong journey. Seeing myself as a CO to war has shaped my career in anthropology and peace studies, seeking to understand how the socioeconomic, cultural structures are connected to the current prevalence of war, how these contrast with cultures that never experience war, and how to promote culture change through nonviolent, creative approaches to conflict transformation. At the daily personal level, it constantly nags at other individual choices connected to all decisions about consumption and finance. As daunting and immense as this part of the iceberg is, I'm provided hope in the human capacity to make these changes by the same spirit that guided me to the first step of becoming a CO. Thanks for your podcast and for the work that you're doing.
Thanks so much for calling in, Bernie. We really appreciate hearing from our listeners. Now we'd love to hear from you. Give us a call and tell us what your first experience of Quaker worship was like. You can leave us a voicemail at 215-278-9411. That's 215-278-9411. I know it's tough, but please try to keep your answer to a minute, and we might share your response on a future episode.